Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, friends, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure to see you again in one of ADI's webinar. Thank you so much for logging in so many of you. I can see there is already 100 people online. We've only just had 3 seconds. So thank you for being with us. Today, a webinar is going to be fast-paced. We have a lot of wonderful speakers for you, and we're going to delve a bit deeper in the essence of the World Alzheimer's Report 2023, which, as you can remember, it was about risk reduction, and in particular, around behavioral changes around risk reduction. I have a illustrious roster of speakers, and I'm going to introduce them in a second. But before I do that, there are a few things that I'm going to talk about. And so if we could have the slides, please. And whilst the slides come up, can I remind you that you can introduce yourself in our chat, and you can ask a question, and we will try and provide answers in the Q&A box. So use them separately, please. Next slide, please. So as ever, I am Paola Barbarino. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Alzheimer's Disease International. And I thank all of the companies that are represented in these slides for having enabled us to create such an interesting World Alzheimer's Report this year. Next slide, please. Yes, as I was saying, it's me. And now we are going to do a poll. And the poll is going to be about how many dementia cases globally do you think could be reduced or delayed by 2050 by adopting risk reduction strategies? Do you think is 25 million, 44 million, or 55 million? Really, we are testing whether you've actually read the report. But anyway, tell us what you think. And in a second, we will tell you the answer. So we leave you under 2 seconds to do this multiple choice, and then let's see what it came out with. Most of you think is 25, and the rest 44, and the least amount think is 55 million. But actually, the right answer is 55 million. At the moment, there are 55 million people living with dementia, we estimate. And think about what we could do. We could have that many millions not actually developing a disease by 2050, where actually we are forecasting there's going to be over 130 million people living with the disease. So it is really, really worth it to adopt risk reduction strategies. Now, thanks for all of you that are introducing themselves online. Next slide, please. Just a quick note about ADI. We were established in 1984. We represent 105 Alzheimer's and Dementia Associations around the world. We are the INGO that deals with Alzheimer and dementia. We represent everybody at the WHO, UN, OECD, other bodies, and we promote the World Alzheimer Month and the report. But our vision is to prevent, care, and include today, as we are waiting for a cure tomorrow, which we hope happens. But so far, care is still the best way to deal with what is happening with Alzheimer and dementia. Next slide, please. Just to remind you, we are a charity, so if you can make a donation, please do. Everything we do is free for everybody that wants to access it, but it's only your contributions that enable us to keep it like that. Next slide, please. And also a small slide to remind you that our 36th Global Conference, the oldest conference on Alzheimer and dementia, is coming up in Krakow in April. Abstracts close. We went over 800 abstracts, which has been a record for us. Thank you to all of you that contributed. And we are already experiencing a lot of people registering. The next deadline for early bird is going to be in January, so consider registering for that. Now, also to thank you, in September, I said that we were going to monitor how many people were going to engage with World Alzheimer's Month. Thanks to all of you, we reached 75 million people on social media, 1,300 pieces of traditional media coverage. The World Alzheimer Report has been covered like nothing before. The 75 million, just to give you an idea, in 2021, we did 45 million. So this is also a huge increase. And thank you, all of you, for doing so much to spread awareness. Now, this is just a little list of some of the media that engaged in World Alzheimer's Month. Now, let me tell you a little bit about the World Alzheimer Report. So next slide, please, Jane. 40% of cases of dementia can be delayed or reduced by addressing 12 modifiable risk factors. The slide on those will come later. This would equate to 55.6 million by 2050. There are other risk factors which are being researched and studied, for example, lack of sleep. You need really to read the report, but also to keep following the debate as science continues to give us wonderful surprises. In the last 6 years, for example, we have added a lot of factors to the 12 factors slide that used to be much smaller. Next slide, please. And some of the recommendations of the World Alzheimer's Report. In the absence of a cure or a treatment that is globally accessible, risk reduction remains the most feasible and proactive way to combat dementia. There is no magic bullet, but there are tangible steps, big and small, that each one of us can do, but it's an issue of changing our behavior. Next slide, please. Risk reduction is something that we do for all of our life, and is more effective if we do it earlier. But having said that, it does not end at diagnosis of dementia either. You can still do a lot to increase your cognitive reserve and slow down the progression of the condition. Next slide, please. But, sorry, the previous slide. The next point is that some of these risks cannot be addressed individually. Governments must address the broader issues, like, for example, green spaces for safe exercise, air pollution, access to education, especially for girls, regulation and guidance around ultra-processed foods. So there are things that we can do ourselves, but there are things that we really do need to take some bigger policy decision. And again, if you read the report, you will understand more about how you also can contribute to this debate. Now, next slide. Thank you, Jane. The World Alzheimer Report seeks to provide tangible and practical advice to the public, those living with diagnosis. You can download it here and read more, and please do. Next slide. And we are actively developing a translation in Arabic, Mandarin, and Spanish for the report, so you'll be able to read it soon in your language. Thank you to all the sponsors that have allowed us to do that for the first time. Thank you. As ever, this webinar is also available with subtitles in several languages. The team is posting the number of languages. Before I introduce my co-speakers, I also would like to thank the team behind the scene that is with me today, in particular Jane Ciborra and Megan Anderson, but also Chris Lynch and Wendy Widener, that have been so instrumental to make sure that this wonderful roster of panelists is with us today. There is a lot to the ADI team, as you know, and everybody is pulling their weight to try and make these webinars as interesting as possible. Now, let me introduce my fabulous panelists. We have Dr. Katrin Seeher of the WHO with us today, Des O'Sullivan and Vali Yanni, a World Alzheimer Report contributor and the dementia advocate and his caregiver, Dr. Jin Zhu from ASI, Dr. Facundo Manes, who is in Argentina for us, a very distinguished neurologist, Dr. Alessandro Biffi, who is with Eli Lilly, Anna Borthwick, who is with Brain Health Scotland, and then last but not least, Gill Livingston at UCL, and Yanti Djani, who is speaking to us from Indonesia and a risk reduction specialist. So next slide, please. It is my pleasure now to hand over the floor to Dr. Katrin Seeher, the Technical Officer of the Department for Mental Health and Substance Use at the World Health Organization. Katrin, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Paola. Very good to be with you this afternoon. Greetings from Geneva. Next slide, Jane, please. As you all know, dementia risk reduction or prevention is absolutely essential from a public health point of view for any chronic condition, but especially for those where we don't have a cure. And that's why risk reduction is fundamentally integrated in both global mandates that we have. That's the Global Action Plan for Dementia, and that's the Integrated Global Action Plan on Epilepsy and Other Neurological Disorders. And because, as you will hear throughout this webinar, and you probably know, many of the risk factors are shared with NCDs. The global targets of these mandates are very closely tied in with the global targets that we set for non-communicable diseases, or NCDs for short. Next slide, please. Now, are we making enough use globally of that important linkage, and are we making progress? No. Drawing on data that we collect as part of the Global Dementia Observatory, we know that less than half of our member states actually run risk reduction campaigns to make the population aware of what they can do, basically. And the majority of the countries are high-income countries. And about only a third of countries do have guidelines for risk reduction. And again, the majority are high-income countries. So we're losing a lot. At the same time, when we monitor and track progress for NCD global targets, we're far from reaching where we want to be. And just to give you an example of how much we're missing out, our colleagues in the physical activity department just last year released a cost study showing how much burden or how much additional cases we could prevent globally. That's 500 million people, or of NCDs we could prevent if we targeted physical inactivity. And while dementia only accounts for 3% of those 5 million cases, the cost that it contributes is 22% of the total cost. That's because, so this is a big financial argument also for dementia risk reduction. And this is a clear message I want to send to all of you to make use of that. Next slide. Now, one way of which, or area in which we work at WHO is on risk reduction guidelines. And unlike the 12 risk factors that you've heard from Paola earlier, or what the Lancet Commission is also addressing, is kind of establishing links between risk factors and then the occurrence of dementia later on. What these clinical guidelines do is they investigate what interventions, what can we actually do to reduce the risk of dementia or the risk of cognitive decline. So that WHO guideline identifies or lists all the interventions for which we do have evidence. We're going to update those guidelines hopefully next year if we get funding, and then we can incorporate or include other risk factors as well. Because one limitation of the current guidelines is, as you will see, they're mainly targeting individuals, and a lot can be done actually at the population level through policy interventions. And so we need to review and establish the evidence for those, for the efficacy of those also. Next slide, or if you click, you see here just some examples of how the key messages of the clinical guidelines have been converted into posters and campaign material. Next slide. And I'm already trying to wrap up to give more space or time to others. But the key messages I really want to send you home with is we do need evidence. So it's all we do is tightly linked to research and science. We need to know or show what interventions will actually work to reduce dementia risk, not just to reduce the risk factor that we've established. Only then can we drive systemic changes. That means change clinical practice, but also change policies. And those are the things that I mentioned we can do at the population level, not just targeting individuals. And we do need to keep a life course approach. So it's never too late, we know, but it's also never too early. So we need to start as soon as possible to build strong brains. And then everything we do, I said, we need to link it to research. That means we need to create more evidence. We need to create evidence in areas where it's previously been lacking or missing. And this is one point that the research blueprint that we launched last year clearly emphasizes, that risk reduction has some clear value in the area of research and is a research priority. And with that, I think I'll leave you on the next slide. Is just a shout out to our knowledge exchange platform. If there are any good activities that you're running in that area, please do share them with us, and we're happy to consider them for the platform. With that, back to you, Paola. I hope that was within 5 minutes.
Yes, indeed, Katrin, you did miracles to do, and also with some very important economics facts and figures. If any of you is listening from governments, I know that there will be a few policymakers. That is a very strong argument. There is a lot that can be done, really. But as we said, if then prevention is started earlier, the cost to society, this famous 55 million, could be a lot of people. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce you to Facundo Manes as our second speaker. Facundo is a congressman and president of the Science, Innovation and Technology Committee in the National Congress of Argentina, and also the founder of the Fundación INECO. Now, Facundo is going to speak to us in particular about the impact of less education as a risk factor and the importance of cognitive reserve. This is something that a lot of people still don't understand, the concept of cognitive reserve. So Facundo will focus on that. Facundo, the floor is yours. We can't wait to hear you.
Thank you very much, Paola. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. Also, I would like to extend my congratulations to the entire Alzheimer's Disease International team for your dedication and hard work. The World Alzheimer Report 2023 discusses education as a significant risk factor for dementia, highlighting the connection between low levels of formal education and an increased risk of developing dementia later in life. This report emphasizes that low levels of education, particularly early in life, can affect one's cognitive reserve and increase the risk of dementia. Education empowers individuals with knowledge, critical thinking skills, and opportunities for personal growth. However, education's impact extends beyond the classroom. Education is not only learning something. Of course, it is learning something, but it's more than that. Education is the capacity of developing a compass and the tools to navigate in a complex and uncertain world. Success in education is about identity, agency, purpose, developing curiosity, open minds, compassion, empathy, mobilizing our cognitive, social, and emotional resources to take action. Numerous epidemiological studies have shown that higher levels of education are associated with a decreased risk of developing dementia. And cognitive reserve is a crucial concept in understanding the link between education and dementia. Cognitive reserve refers to the brain's ability to adapt and compensate for pathological damage, such as that caused by Alzheimer's disease or other brain problems. Individuals with higher level of education tend to have greater cognitive reserve due to the increased neural connection and enhanced cognitive skills acquired through their life, and also through their educational experience. This cognitive reserve acts as a buffer, allowing the person to function at a relatively normal level despite the presence of brain pathology, delaying the clinical manifestation of dementia. Education is also linked to lifelong learning habits. Individuals with higher education levels are more likely to engage in intellectually stimulated activities, such as reading, participating in intellectual hobbies, or pursuing continued education. These activities provide cognitive stimulation and might help preserve cognitive function. Education often leads to better socioeconomic status that is associated with better nutrition, greater access to healthcare, and a healthier lifestyle, all of which are non-protective factors against conditions like hypertension and diabetes, which are risk factors for dementia. To employ education as a tool to lower the risk of dementia, we must prioritize educational opportunities for everyone. It includes addressing disparities in education, promoting lifelong learning, and fostering a culture of intellectual curiosity. In summary, this report, the World Alzheimer Report 2023, underscores the importance of education in reducing the risk of dementia, advocating for educational opportunities as a means to enhance cognitive reserve and potentially delay the onset of dementia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Facundo. It must be the first time that we've got a speaker finishing exactly on the dot of his 5 minutes. Thank you. And for explaining it so clearly, muchas gracias. This is a really complex thing, and many people really don't get it yet, but this is one of the most exciting things. And you, as yourself, a politician as well, you know, and that's why we wanted you to talk about it, the importance of education. Education can only be addressed by policymakers. We don't take those decisions. But you also touched on socioeconomic factors, the fact that some of these then lead to better outcomes because then you become wealthier and then you can address some of the other factors more effectively, which is a fascinating chain of events, which again in the report is explained very clearly. And all of this has to be backed by science. So some of this may sound obvious, but it only can be recommended by us if it's backed by science. And Gill will speak at the end, and she will tell everything to us about the complex process they had to have in order to make sure that all of this was actually collected in a way that made sense from the point of view of evidence. But now I'm going to hand over to someone who is feeling all of this on his own skin. Des O'Sullivan, who is here with us at the webinar today with his wife, Yanti, is a World Alzheimer Report 2023 contributor and a dementia advocate. Des has been wonderful to agreeing to be on this webinar and talk to us about his own experiences and what the finding of the reports really mean to him. Des, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm here for the first time with you, and I'm very honored to be involved in the movement, and look forward to working with you in the future over all the issues that you've already started covering. 7 years ago, I received quite a shock. I received my diagnosis for dementia, and it led me to be determined that I should do everything in my power to counter my dementia and not be crushed by it. Quite the opposite. I'm coming out against it. I felt that the most important thing at the beginning of this whole process was to check the validity of the diagnosis, to make sure that we were working on taking what we were working on was serious and underpinned by the medics. And this is the case. It was made to the point was made to me by other colleagues who are experiencing dementia that they were doing everything they could not to end up in a corner dribbling, as they said. Quite a severe image, that, but clearly it's getting across the idea that we can have an influence, we can have an agency to head off the most serious forms of this disease. So no dribbling in the corner. And what was also important was that this was not seen to be, this condition was not seen to be a full stop. Rather, it was to be a comma. So there are lots of things that we can do, and we shouldn't despair. What do I do in that regard? Well, as I say, about 7 years ago, I got involved in dementia research and dementia commentary. And I got involved in dementia enriching hobbies and activities that would help me to counter dementia. And now I'm participating very fully in a range of sports and interests. Sport is obvious. I'm also involved in physioterrorism, which involves me being frog marched around football fields to enhance the physical exercise that I do. Most significantly this year, I, as well as Valley and other colleagues, were involved in the walk the talk against dementia, which took place in the Camino in Galicia in northern Spain. A fascinating experience involving a huge range of people on a very enriching set of talks. In addition, I've been involved in lots of research, the creation of film material, the creation of reports, and the involvement in testing at medication level. I'm also very involved with social communication and the creation of useful hacks for getting around the problems that dementia imposes upon us. So I'm living well with the dementia that I have. The most important thing for me to leave you with is that living well with dementia means adopting a positive attitude, and in addition to that, remaining grateful for all that we have that's positive. We only need to turn on the television these days to realize that in comparison with most people, we are very fortunate. And on that note, I'll pass you across to the next speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Des. Thank you for giving us your testimony. And I don't think we're going to forget soon. This is not a full stop, but it's a comment. That is a wonderful way of putting it. Although the image of seeing you frog marched onto sports field, it's a little bit of a scary one. But again, these are about behavioral changes, aren't they? So clearly sometimes that's what's needed. Thank you so much for your wonderful testimony and for telling us, that things can happen. And it's important to do that if we want to stay stronger for longer, really. I now am going to, first of all, remind you that Q&A is where you can post your questions to our speakers, the chat where you introduce yourself, and introduce you to our next speaker, Dr. Alessandro Biffi of Eli Lilly, who is going to talk about how these frameworks are evolving in this new era. So, Alessandro, over to you. I can see you have the Golden Gate in your background rather than the word as us, but I hope you're not waking up from the West Coast. Over to you.
Thank you, Paola. No, that's I am actually from the East Coast of the U.S. So good morning, good evening, good afternoon, good middle of the night. It sounds like for some of the folks joining us. It's a privilege to be invited to be with you today. And once again, an amazing thank you and congratulations to ADI and to all the authors for the amazing work that the report is. I have been reading the report and thinking a lot about something that's near and dear to my heart as a previous caregiver for someone with dementia, as a neurologist working in the dementia field, as well as someone now who's working in industry to develop new solutions. And that's the fact that we are now at a point where we can envision a continuum of care for individuals diagnosed with dementia that starts from the very beginning with risk reduction decades before the onset of any problems, and then spans all the way to detection of the problem as early as possible, receiving an accurate diagnosis, as we've heard, knowing exactly what kind of problem we're dealing with, and then post-diagnosis risk reduction and individualized care so that we get all the right solutions and treatment for those that need it in agreement with their preference, their beliefs, and their individual ability to participate in treatment. And so I think this unified continuum of care and risk reduction is really what we should be striving towards in the near future. And it's coming, it's right here, even though it will be a complex and ongoing process to develop this continuum. But I think at every point of this journey, early risk reduction, early detection, accurate dementia diagnosis, post-diagnosis risk reduction, comprehensive care, we have obstacles that we need to tackle. And some of these are scientific, and there's a lot of great research ongoing in each of these steps. Some of these are personal and sort of like rest with the need to improve the penetration of these behaviors, both before and after a diagnosis of dementia, as we've just heard. Necessary also to talk about policy and changes that need to be made at a systemic level, at a society level, at a national level, at an international level, to foster the development of this continuum of care. And I think as individuals connected to dementia in some way, shape, or form, it is our responsibility to continue to strive towards a model where we don't feel responsible for a specific segment of the journey for an individual with dementia, but we're part of a group, of a team that will take care of this condition through an entire lifetime. Now, I do acknowledge that there will be, as I mentioned, substantial barriers, but I think that we are poised to use the right tools in terms of clinical research, in terms of new interventions, in terms of better penetration of risk reduction strategies. What I would like to also point out is that as the prevalence of Alzheimer's disease and dementias continues to increase, developing this model will require overhauling some major aspects of how care is delivered for dementia throughout the world. And so we'll offer an opportunity to revise some of the aspects that are currently maybe less than optimal. And so think about personalizing care. I love hearing about sort of like some of the ways in which risk reduction can be made personal and can be made relevant to individuals. Of course, we want to make sure that everyone is involved in this effort. We have to emphasize the importance of understanding how dementia affects different individuals across sociocultural boundaries, across racial and ethnic background, across gender, sex, and all the relevant factors that modify the individual's experience with dementia. And so in closing, I think this is hopefully a rallying cry. It was a really amazing experience to read the report and see the dawn of this new era, where I think in the clinic, in relating to each other, really, we'll be able to think about the disease as an entire spectrum and take care of the entirety of it for everyone.
Thank you very much, Alessandro, for this really visionary presentation. For many of our members who are in low and middle income country, this is still very much a dream. But to be frank, also for a lot of our members that are in high income countries, this is still very much a dream. I remember going to a meeting talking about precision medicine and thinking, golly, you know, we don't even have a medicine, let alone talking about precision medicine. But the fact is that therapies are being developed, and I will tell us a little bit more about that, I think, left, right, and center. And one of the messages we've been giving with the World Alzheimer Report, in particular in 2021 and 22, is that diagnostics even need to be prepared because so many people are underdiagnosed. And then when they're diagnosed, they still don't receive information. That is a lucky one. At least somebody told to him about the possibility of cognitive reserve. But for so many people, they don't even know they have dementia, and then they don't have any information about what can they do about it. And this is why this World Alzheimer Report was created. I remember a conversation, Gill was there, and Mia was there, and Martin Knapp was there. When we were talking, you guys are discovering all these wonderful things, but people just don't know about it. How can we make it better known? So awareness raising is still so much the nuts and bolts of our mission here. Anyway, I don't want to take time, much as this conversation is fascinating, and I'm going to pass on to our next speaker, Yanti Djani. Now, Yanti is the former UN Women Guild president in Geneva, former vice president of Women International Forum, but more than anything else is the Alzheimer Indonesia risk reduction specialist. So for those of you who have come to our conferences and have done the Pocho Pocho dance, you all know how wonderful it has been to really change the attitude of people in Indonesia around dementia, how it has integrated cultural practices with something that everybody likes doing. And then they've exported it now in many Asian countries that have adapted it to their reality. But let me not tell you about it. Yanti, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Paola. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you. It's an honor for me, Yanti Djani, to be one of the panelists among so many amazing panelists in this very important webinar on risk reduction. Today, I would like to share my journey with Alzheimer Indonesia, and of course, the journey of ALSI Risk Reduction Team, presenting what ALSI has been doing so far, and in which is translating research into practices, risk reduction practices through dancing. The journey began in 2015 when I had a very in-depth discussion with D.Y. Suharya regarding the alarming data of the increased number of people with dementia. Determined to reduce the risk of dementia, we came up with an idea to create a simple fly me to the moon dance. It's kind of very small step, but for us, it's a practical one. Now, why dancing? Firstly, a study by the, there is a study by the New England Journal of Medicine found that dancing can boost your memory and prevent the onset of dementia. They've said that taking the time to remember step and also changing the movement while dancing, it is a great way to challenge your brain no matter your age. And then secondly, I am very sure, being a line dance instructor for more than 15 years, I know that line dancing or dancing makes me happy. It minimizes my stress, and also it improves the balance and then also the strength of. Fly Me to the Moon dance was performed during ALSI presentation on 10 warning signs of dementia at USAID event in Jakarta. We received a very positive feedback at that time. In the same year, you can see here from the slide, ALSI was also invited to participate in a national Pocho line dance. And then, you know what? That ALSI risk reduction team, they can win the First Lady Trophy. Next slide, please. Pocho dance is a traditional dance from Maluku, one of the eastern part of Indonesia province. It's a very popular dance and it has a very simple movement, so it is very easy to do. Research on Pocho dance, you can see on the next slide. Research on Pocho dance by Dr. Ria Maria Teresa, who also joined us tonight, shown that by doing Pocho for 30 minutes twice a week can improve the executive function of 37.5% in patients with type 2 diabetes mellitus with mild cognitive impairment compared to only doing standard exercise once a week. That's what the study shows. And in relation, the next slide, please. In relation to cognitive function, the dance has an aerobic value here, yes, to improve or maintain the executive function through improvement of the neuron plasticity. In 2021, next slide, in consultation with ALSI scientific team, among others, of course, there's geriatrician, there's neurologist, and people with dementia, I choreographed a Jangan Maklum Dengan Pikun or JMDP dance, loosely translated as do not underestimate memory loss. The dance is an adaptation of Pocho dance. The JMDP dance was performed on Zoom during COVID-19 with hundreds of participants, almost 500 participants from more than 20 countries. 10 different cross-crawl movements in JMDP dance really challenged your brain. Since being posted in the ALSI YouTube channel in September 2021, the video has been viewed by 13,920 viewers as of right now, and more are joining. It is our hope that more members of Alzheimer's Disease International could practice this Pocho dance or JMDP dance, an evidence-based risk reduction strategies that ALSI has been using as tools since 2015. In closing, I would like to quote Henry Ford. He once said, "Coming together is beginning, keeping together is progress, working together is success." Let's collaborate in our common quest and let's dance together, because the next slide, we will show you a 1 minute of the dance, JMDP dance. So please and thank you, Jane.
Siapa bilang pikun itu biasa saja? Siapa bilang pikun itu tak berbahaya? Jangan malu dengan pikun, jangan malu dengan pikun. Hati-hatilah bila sudah mulai lupa, bingung tidak fokus, marah-marah curiga yang berlebihan. Pikun jangan pikun, pikun jangan malu pikun, pikun jangan pikun, pikun jangan malu dengan pikun.
What a way to end this fantastic dance. Thank you so much, Yanti. I do need to tell those online, some couldn't see the move, you'll be able to see the video again. I need to tell you that one of the fantastic things that in the terrible time that Indonesia had with COVID, ALSI did was to persuade the Minister of Health to promote the Pocho dance whilst people were waiting for COVID vaccinations in very, very long queues. They organized the impromptu sessions, and that really contributed at a time where people were desperate for things to do as well to the spread of the dance popularity in Indonesia. What a wonderful way to turn a very sad situation in a very positive one. Thank you so much. I think that you probably all will hear more about it in Krakow as well. But now let me pass to our next speaker. We're a little bit low on time. Dr. Jin Zhu, who is joining us from ASI. And Dr. Zhu is going to focus on how the clinical trial landscape is also shifting in this particular area. So, Jean, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Paula. Thank you for the invitation. It's exciting to be here. At ASI, I'm leading the late phase clinical development programs for Alzheimer's disease. For today's topic, the angle that I would like to take is from the AD clinical trial perspective. You've noticed, I believe, that in recent years, the landscape of Alzheimer's disease clinical trial has changed significantly. The groundbreaking advance in Alzheimer's disease research allows the field to better understand the disease pathology and the progression. As a disease continuum, Alzheimer's disease pathology starts many years, even decades before the clinical symptom onset. We now have good clinical research tools to measure the AD pathology through the entire AD continuum. More importantly, multiple anti-amyloid therapies have demonstrated treatment effects in terms of brain amyloid reduction and the clinical outcome benefit, including slowing the clinical progression. These treatments benefits also appear to translate into the benefit in health-related quality of life measures. The additional subgroup analysis also showed the treatment benefits in the participants with low level of amyloid and tau pathology in their brain, strongly suggesting that it can potentially slow down the progression at early stage of the disease, even before the onset of clinical symptoms. This hypothesis is being tested in clinical trial setting as a secondary prevention strategy by evaluating the treatment benefits in the individuals who are at risk of developing Alzheimer's disease, but without clinical symptoms. The objective is to evaluate if the therapy will slow or prevent cognitive decline or clinical progression in the at-risk population. One ASI-sponsored trial named AHEAD 345 study is evaluating lecanemab treatment in the early stage of the AD continuum. We conducted this study in collaboration with the Alzheimer's Clinical Trial Consortium, ACTC, and the study enrolls the participants who are clinically normal, cognitively unimpaired, but already have intermediate or elevated level of amyloid in the brain. Those participants are enrolled in A3 or A45 trial, depending on the level of amyloid in their brain, and they're randomized to receive either lecanemab or a placebo treatment for 4 years. The primary endpoint is a cognitive outcome measure called PEC-5. This study is ongoing and will enroll a total of 1,400 participants in North America, Europe, and Asian Pacific region. Well, one of the challenges in this type of secondary prevention trial is recruitment, because those individuals are clinically normal. So the traditional way of identifying the participants from existing database is not effective. We took the advantage of decentralized clinical trial initiative and have brought the screening to the community. We collaborate with the local communities in hosting community events, including not only clinical trial screening, but also brain health awareness and Alzheimer's disease education sessions. Based on the screening results, each participant's risk of having Alzheimer's disease pathology in their brain is evaluated. If they are qualified for a clinical trial, they will be referred to a study site for further evaluation. If not, then we provide them advice in maintaining a healthy and active lifestyle. So in summary, the emerging paradigm shift in clinical trial of Alzheimer's disease by evaluating the therapies in earlier disease stage would allow us to determine the optimal intervention timing for disease-modifying treatment and disease prevention. In a few years, I believe we will have the data to answer those questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean, for this very interesting presentation. Again, focusing on element that may be kind of coming on stream in a not too distant future, but also touching on something that we have been focusing quite a bit in ADI, which is the how can populations that generally are not aware of clinical trials or where they're happening more interested in these in order to increase diversity of population taking part, because so far it's been very homogeneous, and in many places in the world this is becoming increasingly a big factor. I know some of you following us online also are talking about gender differences, so that is another thing where certainly there is a need of further focus. And finally, not to forget that we are on an ADI webinar. There's been a great comment in the chat line about somebody in Turkey trying in the terms of the risk reduction level, food therapy in by getting people with dementia and cooking in Turkey. Now, if I do come to Turkey, I do want to come and see this and eat the outcome, because it sounds like a brilliant idea to me, and I can't wait to see the recipes. You will have seen that during World Alzheimer's Month, we published the recipe donated to us by a famous chef to whom we are very grateful. This is something that is also very important. We dealt with it in the previous webinar. So if you are more interested in food, do go and listen to webinar number 1 of this series. So with that said, can I now hand over to Anna Borthwick, who is the Head of Impact and Innovation for the Scottish Brain Sciences Project. Now, Anna, you're going to talk to us about something that has been making headlines all over the world, which is brain injury. Very sad, but very important topic on which we are still trying to come to a consensus. So talk to us about your funding. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Paola. It's an absolute pleasure to join you and to be talking to you about the work that's been going on in Scotland in recent years. Before I begin, as Paola says, I want to note that in a few minutes I'm going to touch on the issue of domestic abuse and head injury. And if you'd be more comfortable sitting that section out, please do feel free to do so, and then rejoin when I pass back to Paola and on to Gill. So in Scotland, we're in a very fortunate position to have a lot of activity building around risk reduction, early detection and interventions. And one of the reasons for this is the pioneering work of our national dementia charity, Alzheimer Scotland, which runs the Brain Health Scotland initiative. That was established in 2020 and is funded by the Scottish Government. For full disclosure, I used to lead that project, and so I'm admittedly biased, but the team there continue to do incredible work to bring brain health to public attention. And I believe actually some of them are on this webinar right now as well. One of the jewels in the Brain Health Scotland crown will be the delivery of Scotland's first NHS Brain Health Clinic, an open access service that will offer risk profiling, early detection and personalised action plans, as Alessandro was mentioning earlier. And for anyone who wants to know more about this, please do drop me a line, and I'd be delighted to connect you with the team at Alzheimer Scotland, although absolutely I believe they're on the call right now too. I've now moved on to another organisation called Scottish Brain Sciences, which is focused on delivering clinical trials for early detection and intervention and widening public access to them. Part of the work that's been going on in Scotland over recent years, along with others, has been to understand how the modifiable risks play out in our population and how we can support their reduction. And I would like to now focus on head injury and the role of intimate partner violence or domestic abuse. The World Health Organization estimates that 1 in 3 women globally will experience physical and sexual abuse. And of these women who experience partner violence, the majority will suffer traumatic brain injury. One Harvard-based researcher puts this figure as high as 75%. Now, when it comes to traumatic brain injury, the greatest focus of research to date has been in sports, and many of you will be aware of the increasing attention building around repetitive head injury in games like football and rugby. But it's increasingly being recognised that of all the constituencies affected by TBI, Victims of domestic abuse and survivors of partner violence are the largest and least understood. One estimate published in the Journal of Brain Sciences last year suggests the number of women affected by TBI and domestic abuse is 12 times as high as athletes and military personnel combined. So how can we approach progress here? Obviously, with intimate partner violence, it's not straightforward. Like in sports, awareness is critical, not only of the causes of and prevention of violence, but of its long-term implications for men and for women. Those who do survive may need help to recognise that their confusion, anxiety, or depression may be the symptoms of brain injury and not simply the psychological legacy of abuse. In Scotland, only 3% of women volunteer head injury as a risk factor for dementia. So it's clear we need to do an awful lot of work to increase public awareness of that specific risk. We need research, and the good news is that in the UK, we're very fortunate that steps are being taken in the right direction. The Drake Foundation is supporting a study at Glasgow University, but we need much more funding in this area to understand more about identifying and managing concussion in women. And finally, action. Of course, this isn't simple. There's no referee behind closed doors in the way that you would look to in the sports arena. And the start must be in targeting the causes of violence and working with those who commit these crimes. But there are other solutions to support survivors as well. We want to work with police to ensure that training includes an assumption that domestic abuse is likely to involve head injuries, and to use concussion protocols in the way that football coaches and other sporting professionals are being trained to do. Confusion and fogginess may in some scenarios appear to be linked with drug or alcohol use, when in truth they're actually signs of traumatic injury. We want to support more medical training to ensure that women are taken seriously when they report these symptoms, and to include questions around partner violence in history taking. We understand that 72% of domestic abuse victims are not identified at emergency services, partly because it's difficult to spot all the symptoms, and partly because due to fear and stigma, they're not always accurately reported by victims. And we need professionals and survivors to understand what steps they can take to protect their ongoing health. Research. Of course, at Scottish Brain Sciences, we're going to be working really hard with other partners in this field to ensure that we support people with this specific risk factor to come forward and join our research programmes as one of our key target communities. Finally, if you'd like to learn more about this topic, I'd really recommend in the first instance the work of Dr. Caroline Criado-Perez in her book Invisible Women. She also has a sister podcast series called Visible Women, which has a dedicated episode on this issue, which is really enlightening and incredibly helpful to bring this issue to light. I'm now going to hand back over to Paola and Gill, and I'll look forward to our discussion in a short time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna. Now it's number 2 to finish exactly on the dot. It's incredible. What's going on? Anna, what an important topic that you're raising with us. Again, many of you will have read, there's been a lot in the paper, in the papers recently, thanks to Anna's work, about what's happening with highlighting how brain injury is a domestic issue as well, and not just what we are reading about sports. Some of what Anna talked about is difficult to digest, but it's true, and we do need to take it on board, because again, there may be other reasons, especially if you're a medical professional, when you see people coming with the issues to see you, and this is not something we should be shying away for. So thank you for shining a spotlight on that. I would also like to ask, many people on the chat line are talking about a natural remedy, Alzheimer's disease. Can I remind you all, we had a full discussion on these in the first fireside chat that we ran back in February. Jane and Megan will post the link to that in the chat line. So if you want to understand what else could you do in terms of natural things, that is the best port of call. There is a lot that is around that doesn't work, and we, as ever, bring you what there is evidence actually works and tell you what is there to know about everything else. So we've tried our best also to tackle that topic in an earlier webinar. Now it is my enormous honor to introduce Professor Gill Livingston, Professor of Psychiatry of Older People at UCL, but critically also the chair of the Lancet Commission that published the wonderful report from which we added quite a few risk factors to that famous infographic I was telling you about. Professor Livingston has been amazing in also helping us thinking our strategy, our focus on risk reduction, and also the way that we interact with government regarding that. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the Q&A, but for now, the floor is yours, Gill. And again, post your questions. I'm sure there will be many in the Q&A. Thank you, Gill.
Thank you very much for inviting me here. It's a real honour to be here, and I've been asked to talk mainly about hearing, so I am, but I can talk and do talk for many, many hours about risk reduction in a variety of ways. So I'm talking a bit about the Lancet reports, and Jane said to me, I don't know what these circles are. These circles are altmetric, and they are reports of how often you are quoted in the media, including social media, and it comes up, I don't know how it gets to its number, but the number 7,600 or whatever it is at the moment means that it's about the 350th or 340th most often quoted out of 24.5 million articles that they quote. So dementia risk reduction is really being quoted in the media and in the press. Can I go on to the next slide, please? I'm going to talk rapidly, my 5 minutes, about dementia risks. What are they? And I may not be the first to mention some of them, so I won't talk about them very much. And about hearing and what should we do. And just to say that, like the WHO, the 2024 report of the Lancet Commission, which is just about to be submitted, does talk a lot about both mechanisms and evidence about what we can do to make a big difference, as well as new ones. Can you go on to the next slide, please? So this is the 12 risk factors, and it shows the population attributable fractions, how much could theoretically be prevented in the population if the risk factor would go away. And overall, for these 12 risks, it's 40% of all dementias. Now, obviously, they won't all go away completely, but they can be massively reduced and changed. And Paola said some of them seem obvious, like it's, but I think that we should bear in mind that they didn't used to be obvious, that being obvious is a matter of education, knowledge and research, and that people used to think there was nothing you could do, that dementia was just something that you either got or you didn't get, and that was just luck. Or so now we know a huge amount, and so much that it's become, much of it's becoming common knowledge. I'd like it all to be common knowledge, but we're not quite there yet. So I'd like you to note that hearing loss is the highest of all the risk factors, and this completely surprised me when I first found this out, but now I'm not surprised. Now I just accept it. And if you put hearing, smoking and education together, that makes 20%, so half of the risk factors could be, it could in theory be altered with a bit more education, tackling of hearing loss, and people stopping smoking. These are not impossible things. And as we've heard, we've done economic calculations, and they're actually would save money. They wouldn't just, they're not just cost effective, but they actually save money. Can we go on to the next slide, please? So I just want you to think about this, is about people as complicated. So I'm going to talk about hearing loss, but people have more than one risk factors, and it's not just randomly they have more than one risk factor, but they cluster together. So the person who has head injury, or some of the people, it won't be everybody, but is more likely to, for example, drink more. The person who is overweight is more likely to take less exercise, have high blood pressure and diabetes. And so we correct all of these things for understanding that people are complicated. So if you just look at education, the person with less education is more likely to have other risk factors. So if you correct for the fact that people have clustered risk factors. It goes down from 19.4 to 7.1, and hearing loss from 22.2 to 8.2. So it's really very, very important to understand that people have multiple things happening, and just changing one is often not enough. Can you go on to the next slide? Thank you. So we know that hearing loss is related to increased future dementia. We didn't used to know that, but we do now. And we know that if you look at studies 10 years before the people are beginning to develop dementia, or 15 or 20 years before, that people with hearing loss are at increased risk of developing dementia. We did I just want to talk to you about some work which we haven't done, actually other people have done since then, looking at it. So last year in JAMA Neurology, there was a systematic review and meta-analysis, and it showed that people who used hearing aids for hearing impairment had a 20% lower risk of cognitive decline and a 17% lower risk of developing dementia than people who did not use hearing aids. So using hearing aids really seemed to make a difference. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Now, the criticism of naturalistic studies are that maybe the people who use hearing aids are the people who look after themselves better, have a social network to help support them, use hearing aids and have the money to buy them. So maybe using hearing aids, it's not the hearing aids itself, but it's a marker of the people who are going to do well. And so Frank Lim in the United States and John Hopkins published this year in the Lancet his trial of randomized controlled trial of hearing aids. So in that case, the people in each of the arms are the same. And he recruited two lots of people. He recruited healthy volunteers from advertisements and older adults who'd been in another study and who had been sort of hanging around for 20 years in this other study and getting older. And they had a pre-specified analysis of the two groups separately. And it was very, very interesting. So it was substantially affecting the people who'd already been in another study and been followed up for about 20 years. They were much less healthy than the normal volunteers. They were a couple of years, 3 years older. They had lower baseline cognition. They smoked more. They had less education, more often lived alone, more diabetes, more hypertension. And there was an astonishing effect of the hearing aids. They had 48% less deterioration. And in the group of volunteers, there was no difference between groups and also no deterioration over 3 years. And you can't make a difference in people who won't deteriorate anyway. And that goes back to the SI study. It's extremely difficult, even if something does work, to demonstrate it unless you have the people who are going to deteriorate anyway. So they're looking for people with high amyloid, but we should all be looking for people in studies where we're trying to prevent deterioration who are at high risk. And that probably means not people who are very like us, not the most educated people who are always reading about what they're going to do and who are trying their very best to do it. 48% is less deterioration, is more than you would expect. And we wonder, and they're going to analyse whether it's a gateway. Once you can hear, not only do you hear better, but you go out more, you go and see your doctor to get things checked up because you can hear what they're saying to you, you treat your hypertension, you get less socially isolated, your mood goes up, whether not being able to hear, it's not just not being able to hear, but it prevents everything else, you doing everything else. It'd be interesting to see what it does. And in the UK Biobank, sorry, can you just go back to the other one? The UK Biobank, they found that the people who used hearing aids had no difference in risk than for people who had no hearing impairment at all. So using hearing aids seemed to get rid of the risk. And that, again, that's not a randomized controlled trial. That's a naturalistic study. and they looked, if you divided it up, if you considered people with cardiovascular disease, that didn't make any difference, so it wasn't working through that. Looked at people in higher income, higher education, that didn't make any difference, and they looked at genetic alleles, and it also didn't make any difference if you looked at people 10 to 15 years before and 5 to 10 years before, suggesting it's not that people who are already dementing have hearing problems, it's that people who have hearing problems are more likely to dement. Lastly, there was a study of mild cognitive impairment, and the people with hearing loss who used hearing aids, it had on average 4 years till they developed dementia, and those who didn't, excuse me, it took on average 2 years. So it looks like it can prevent, even at that stage, it makes a difference, can give you 2 more years. Can you go to the next slide, please? So what now? According to the World Health Organization, in global burden of disease, 59% of people in their late 50s and early 60s have hearing loss. So if you're in your 50s or 60s, it's more likely that you have hearing loss than you don't. And I think we've got to be working, considering stigma, considering how younger people generally have things in their ears all the time, and that, to making hearing aids pretty and useful, that they now have Bluetooth on them, and that the things that we should all have. They're going to be accessible for people with hearing loss. So in the UK, they're free. In America, they've now made them over the counter. And I think that means they've gone down from about 8,000 to about 2,000, but there's still a substantial amount of money. We should reduce hearing loss by lowering harmful noise exposure, so it's not so universal, the problem. And we should help people wearing them. And I think that we should be considering, and I know that they are considering in the United Kingdom, whether people in late midlife should be screened for hearing loss to try to prevent dementia. So as World Health Organization have suggested, we're going from this is a problem to let's think of the solution. So thank you for your attention. And as I say, I could and do talk about these things all day, and that's UCL, which is where I come from.
Thank you very much, Gill. And perhaps one day we'll have to give you 2 or 3 hours to talk about it in detail. There were a lot of questions whilst we spoke. Has there been quite a few questions for all the participants of this webinar? Some interesting questions that have come up, for example, is risk reduction. So is the effects of vaping comparable, for example, to smoking? What about PTSD, whether Anna had some answers to that? Some really interesting questions about some other of the risk factors that we've mentioned, but we are not going to have the time, I'm afraid, because in order to allow our speakers to speak, we only have 2 minutes. So I'm going to ask the speakers to be super rapid and answer to me one question. Ultimately, we at ADI have the interesting but sometimes difficult job of persuading governments that risk reduction really works. So if each one of you had one message on a government of something that really you think would be a low-hanging fruit, what would that message be? Could I please ask Katrin first?
If I had that easier answer. No, I think it was also raised in one of the questions. I think we need more advocacy. We still need to educate policymakers and clinicians about the close linkages. We're not making enough use of NCD risk factors and dementia risk factors being the same, and then selling that as we're going to win if we're going to invest in dementia risk reduction. So linking it to NCD, they're ultimately also going to win. That's where we're
Thank you so much, Katrin. Can I ask Facundo? No, I think we've lost Facundo. Oh, no, yeah, we got Facundo. Yes.
Well, I think this is a very important topic because I am a neurologist, a neuroscientist, and a politician. And I think we need to talk. Sometimes we publish paper like the one that we saw in the previous talk, a very important paper, very important work, but politicians don't read that. So they don't have time. There is a study that shows that politicians only read 10 minutes per day, and they don't read Lancet. They they read other things. So I think we need to go out from our comfort zone and to talk to them. And I think the more solid bridge between scientific evidence and real politics, we can do better things. But we need to go out and talk to them.
Thank you so much. So true. We know that if we talk, then things do effectively move forward. So we'll have to do more of that. There's any I don't know if I can see that on my screen. That's whilst you, yeah, that's very good. Yeah.
Okay. This is Des's other half, and he's asked me to speak on his behalf here. My name is Vali. One thing that I would like as a low-hanging fruit from the government is maybe to create, dementia-friendly, dementia active societies or communities around. So, and it kind of crosses between the risk reduction actually before you get dementia, but also when you get dementia. So if you've got lots of activities that one of the things that we advocate quite a lot is about having the agency. So the agency of people living with dementia is so crucial that you don't get the kind of the label of being somebody with dementia, and then it's kind of you're crossed out of the community or of the society. You still have agency, you still can do things. So if we can focus on what we can do more than what we can't do, I think that's a step forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much. What we can do rather than what we can't do, and the positivity of it, which is all at the heart of this, and also at the heart of the slogan for World Alzheimer's Month, no, never too early, never too late, though. That is also what's important. Now, can I ask Alessandro to come on this question, please? Alessandro, can everybody unmute themselves so that we don't waste the precious seconds, given we've got very little time, please? Alessandro, no, we've lost him. Can I ask can I ask Anna to come on this one, please?
Sure. That's a challenging question. We could have a whole other webinar on it, but I think from everything that we've learned in Scotland, I think adopting a public health approach to risk reduction and dementia and trying to adopt the positive mindset that you find in that area is really, really helpful, and something that I hope we can continue to take forward.
Lovely, thank you so much. And Dr. Jean?
In my mind, one of the low-hanging fruit, which is very much in need, is a education program for awareness of brain health in general, and not only in the developed country, but all over the world, including all race and ethnicity groups and their communities, for brain health awareness, so that we can start early, build the knowledge that we can reduce the risk factors and approach disease prevention in one day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jean. Alessandro, we got you back. If you can unmute yourself and give us your view.
I think for me, as you mentioned, Paula, the low-hanging fruit is make dementia diagnosis a policy, make it available to everyone, and make it communicated to everyone a ethical mandate, so that we can empower people who have been diagnosed.
Thank you so much. More power to those that finally do have some knowledge and perhaps want to know what they can do about it. Last but not least, Gill.
Okay, I agree we've got to talk to politicians more, but the United States now have dementia prevention as part of their policy, and they're attacking these risk factors. They're getting it from the Lancet and from the WHO, so somebody somewhere is reading it and talking to them. And we've, members of our commission have tried to talk to them, and they're also in Britain, they have some in part of the midlife check, and they're thinking of adding more. So I think that my low-hanging fruit is that we need to have advocates or people who talk to government from in every single country, and talk to them and tell them the really simple message that we heard at the beginning, that you save money by preventing dementia, because that's what they need to do. They need to save money, and that we have the knowledge, and that we have the will. That the thing that the people who vote for them want least to have is dementia. It's the illness that they most dread. So we've got a real vote winner there. So I think, and I'm hoping that ADI will continue their work internationally to find these people and talk internationally. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We had quite a few policy makers on the webinar, including, of course, Facundo as one of the panelists, other policymakers that want to get in touch and tell us what they think about that. The economic argument is unimpeachable. It's absolutely very, very strong, but a lot of governments are just not listening to it. And what Katrin say also that some of these are non-communicable diseases, common factors, not all of them are, but some are, and we're really missing a trick by not using that more, by not coming out with stronger public health campaigns that also include an element of dementia. That is my penny worth. Once again, a lot of thank you to our wonderful panelists, to all of those that asked questions, some of which have been answered online or in the course of the webinar. To my wonderful team that has made sure that this webinar was, I hope, interesting and engaging for everybody as usual. Yanti, I didn't ask Yanti. Yanti, what was your penny worth? Sorry, I forgot. So many speakers.
No worries, but I agree with Dr. Jane and also Alessandra, of course, because in Indonesia, we've communicated, especially Alzheimer Indonesia, they try so hard to approach the government part. Is from the Minister of Health already give a very good support for us, but of course we need more support, so socials about this dementia, and of course since very early age, if you know about this dementia, so dementia also can goes to school, to university, just to educate them about this Alzheimer. So the earlier they know about this, then they can have, at least since very early stage, then they can do this, and they know about dementia and the risk reduction tools, everything that can you do. For me is dancing, so let's dance together. Thank you.
Me and DY will renew our effort to make Budi Sadikin do something about the Indonesian state of health. We'll try our best. But before I finish, I just want to thank our audience. There's still over 200 people with us on the line. Thank you, thank you, thank you for following what we do and for telling more people about what we do, and for taking these messages, making them yours, applying them in your country. Is only together, as some of you said, that we can really make a difference. But we are making a difference, believe you me, we are. Things are moving, so let's continue to have them move. Thank you all, and I wish you a lovely day in your respective countries. Bye-bye.